Hey Tony, nice to meet you, man. Thanks to finally see face to face with you. You know, we've been talking for a little bit on Facebook, but you're taking the time to do this, so that's pretty awesome, man. So Tony Casares, our topic today is the importance of having fun in jiu-jitsu, right? And before we start, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us kind of like you and your jiu-jitsu world right now, if you will.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm always, up for doing these type of interviews. I'm really excited about jiu-jitsu and sharing as much as I can. So I've been training and involved with jiu-jitsu for over 16 years. Started back in 2006. I was always into sports. When I was really young, I kind of had like these anxiety problems. And when I started playing sports, it kind of went away. Well, at the end of high school, I stopped playing sports, so I needed something to do, and jiu-jitsu was the next best thing. So I started training jiu-jitsu my freshman year in college, and I've been addicted ever since. Now I own my school. I have my now online platform. I'm trying to push as much as I can. We have students, from all walks of life. We have hobbyists, we have competitors, women, children, families. So my job is just to, not only teach jujitsu, but hopefully make an impact at some point in their lives.
That's awesome, man. Seriously, like, and it does make an impact. It really does, especially in like when you just talked about your anxiety issues when you're younger. Like that really speaks to me because kind of my journey and my overcoming of my own anxieties has happened through jujitsu. So that's really important to me. So I guess we can start off. So we're talking about fun, right? So I guess we should define it, right? So like kind of what does fun look like in the gym for you, maybe at your gym, the one that you own and teach at, or the ones that you've trained at since you were about 15 years ago or so?
Yeah. So it's a pretty complex answer, but I think I can simplify it in this way. I was a teacher for 8 years. I taught at the high school. I taught at the college level. I even taught at the middle school. And before that, I was a English and writing tutor at the college and university I went to. And so I've always been taught to communicate well, build a relationship with the person I'm helping. I've been tutored before in different subjects that I needed help with. So learning how it feels like to be the student, learning how it feels like to be the mentor, the teacher, it's really helped me in jiu-jitsu because I'm able to understand. Well, first of all, I had to study it in college too. Is like learning styles, right? Everybody learns differently. You have different auditory learners, you have visual learners, you have kinesthetic learners, people that are much more prone to movement. In jiu-jitsu, you have a little bit of everything as well. And so my job is to offer as much as I can where the student can gravitate towards building their own sense of learning. Because if I just focus on my style, which by the way, I feel my style of jiu-jitsu is very user friendly. That would be a good word. I feel like any my style because I'm not tall, I'm not big, I'm not strong compared to someone who's very athletic. So I can relate enough to the athlete because I played sports and I know what it takes to really require that movement. But I could also relate to maybe the hobbyist who feels like they're not as athletic or explosive. I can also relate to the smaller children and even the women because the way I move my jujitsu, it's very dependent on technique. So I feel that if the student can identify, first of all, their personality, there's a huge correlation between personality and jiu-jitsu style. Second, if they can really identify their body type, this will also help them kind of narrow their their style. And then third, if they can really figure out how they learn at best. And so some students, really prefer drilling more. Some students prefer rolling more. I think both are beneficial. I, as a coach, will say, hey, if today you want to really maximize your learning, I would say I have students sometimes are like, hey, I'm not going to roll today. I'm just going to drill. To me, that's perfect. I did my job because that student identified what they needed to do that day, right?
Yeah.
Because then oh, so no, you got to roll, 100%. We got to get, no. Like everybody has a different journey, and then everybody's at a different place in their journey. So I think when you learn all of that, it becomes fun, right? You go full circle, and then you get to just go up to the class, not feeling pressured by your coach or your peers, just wanting to really enjoy the process. And then once you identify those things, right, like your personality, your body type, and what kind of game you play, right? Like a tall person would be really good with lasso guard.
Yeah.
A shorter, stocky person would be really good with half guard.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean the person doesn't need to learn half guard. And that doesn't mean the shorter person doesn't need to learn lasso. So we teach everything, and I'll have like I have a whole curriculum. I have the Alliance curriculum. I have the curriculum that I've built from my knowledge over the years, and I basically theme out the week. But I tell my students, hey, I'm showing techniques, learn all of them to understand jiu-jitsu. But when it comes down to, let's say, competition, or let's say you're going through a rut, like I wrote that post that one day, go back to what made you fall in love with jiu-jitsu,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess fun equals love, love equals fun kind of thing. And that's true. It's like you really got to kind of go back to basics and what drew you to in the first place. And that's subjective, right? That's everybody's got their own version of it. Like mine is, busting balls in classroom and stuff like that, or really finding that training partner that really synergizes with me well. We really have good roles, and we learn about it. We learn from each other, and we come out not being too beat up at the end, So yeah.
Right. And you said something very important, right? Like so it sounds like you were a jokester in school, which is great. That's reality. So a good example of that would be like, you baiting somebody,
Mhm.
and when they go for the bait, you immediately take their back, or you sweep them, or you get them in a loop choke, right?
Yeah.
That's personality. And just hearing that from you, when you're able to identify that first, then you can start figuring out your game as you go.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not like you, right? They're very serious, so their game is very linear. It's very like, okay, I'm coming forward, I'm going to do that, which is fine too. Whatever, at the end of the day, whatever makes you realize you enjoy the sport, the art, because of it. I think ultimately, I think a lot of people lose track of this as they get older, as they get into jiu-jitsu, and they stop having fun. And they call it, the blue belt blues, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
biggest jiu-jitsu is at blue belt. And it's because, well, honestly, probably the biggest dropout is probably at white belt, to be honest. But in terms of belt colors outside of white belt, blue belt would be the next one. And then as you go through purple, brown, it becomes less and less and less common. So I think you saying that, I think just highlights exactly what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess, and that actually leads perfectly into my next question. So kind of what are some signs of students losing motivation or going through like an unhappy phase where they're just they're going through that spiral? So like in your experience, in your class, in your journey teaching, and kind of training with your teammates and such, what have you seen? Like what are the kind of the trademark or the like the signs of this happening to somebody?
So as well as I know, that jiu-jitsu, you can't go very far if you have a victim mindset in jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah.
Because you immediately learn that you're not the best, you're getting tapped out, what's going on, your 300 bench press doesn't matter, your 400 or 500 deadlift, irrelevant, right? So it's very hard to do well in jiu-jitsu when you don't really understand why, or not even why, but your ego and your pride just need to take a little bit of a filter. They just need to have a little bit of a filter, maybe a lot for some others, right? And
Yeah.
so if you can enter the jiu-jitsu lifestyle and humble yourself, and some people say like, oh, leave the ego at the door, and that's false. We have to bring the ego because we want to be competitive, we want to get better, and you want to tap out your friend, and you want to have fun as well. So that's important. But you also do want to, just bring it down a notch. Understand that you're not the best and there's a lot of learning to do. So to answer your question, I feel the biggest setbacks for some of these students. In my experiences, they come in and they feel completely unmotivated. They don't see the progress. And what's happening is they're joining, it's like a school of fish. They're joining the school of fish and they're comparing themselves to the other fish within the school of fish. And they're like, well, what the heck? I'm not getting anywhere near them. But they're not comparing themselves to the fish they were before, right? Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
fish were before would swallow the minnow they were before they joined
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
Even close. But they don't see that because they're comparing themselves to other people. They're comparing themselves to an 18-year-old, high school wrestler who joined jiu-jitsu and is like submitting maybe some colored belts. And they're like, what? And then, they don't look at where they were and where they are now. And that gap right there, that gap that they just were able to like really grow it within that line of, maybe sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months, and sometimes they don't see it until years. But that area, they should be completely grateful. So in my experience, it's always been that, like, the first thing I see is they get unmotivated because of the progression. They feel like, hey, I'm not like that guy over there. And I pointed that guy and I'm like, that guy was, number 8 in the state in wrestling, or that guy over there. And go, that guy can do a backflip and he's never taken tumbling lessons. So he's pretty, and they feel discouraged. I think that's the number one reason. Some reasons behind that, I think, will be life obstacles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Family, they have wives, husbands, they have children, and, getting good at jiu-jitsu requires you to show up and be consistent and train. And a lot of the peak hours of my academy are always at night. I mean, we have a pretty strong noon class, varies 10, 20 students. But at night we have, 30, 40 plus a class. And we have several classes. So it's like 40 students in one class, 30 students in the next class. That's 70 people, right? In like 2 hours. What does that tell me? That tells me majority of people just have the time there because they're working from 8 to 5 and they got to take the kids to school and then they got to pick them up and then they got to have dinner and then they got to be able to put their kids to sleep, right? So that's the next big challenge. And then later they get better at jiu-jitsu, right? Mm-hmm. And they get a stripe. And they're like, oh, I only got a stripe. Well, is this really worth it? I would tell them 100% it's really worth it, because it goes back to my analogy of the minnow and the fish. Where are you in this journey? And whether it's a stripe, a belt, heck, even if it's just a month of improvement, it goes a long way when you're able to really overcome those two obstacles. So one, I would say that the most common is the progression. And I think they're gauging it differently. They're looking at everyone else instead of themselves. I wish there was an objective way to look at it. And you probably can. You can all actually put out an Excel sheet and you can see who you roll with. And I guarantee you, the people who tapped you out and pressure past you are doing it less as you go. And then at some point, the new people, you'll get to pressure pass and tap them out as well. But you're not in the, in my case, I see this a lot too, because I separate a lot of the beginners with the advanced, because I don't want the beginners to get discouraged. So when a person graduates to the advanced class, they're now a minnow again. They were like the big fish with the fundamentals group. And now they're with, oh, you're with the 4 stripes. You're with the colored belts now. Yeah. And so I get frustration. So I always give my students the options to go back and forth. Like, hey, if you feel you need some time, I'll have colored belts sometimes who are prepping for a belt exam. They go with the fundamentals. I have colored belts who took 2-3 years off and they're like, hey, can I start with the fundamentals? It's been a while. Absolutely. So in my gym, there's never this pressure to train hard. It's just train smart. And there's never this pressure to try to show something that you need to be better than. It's never like that. So those are the two biggest, I think those are the two biggest obstacles. It's the progression within the gym. They're not looking at themselves, they're looking at others, right? Which I would strongly argue against, that they shouldn't do that. And then the second would be family life obstacles, spending time with their family, their wife, their husbands, their kids, the workload. So sometimes it just feels good to just go home after work, right? And just, hang out with the family. So I understand how that can be a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Just, being spread thin in general, is kind of takes the fun out of a lot of things sometimes, you just don't even realize it. And as far as progression goes, definitely, it's like, I try to compare myself to 200-pound guys in class. I'm like, I can't do what this guy does at my experience level, but it's your head, your worst enemy is your own head, right?
That's
Um, it really is. But so I guess kind of going along with this, like we're talking about the ruts, we're talking about the plateaus, getting those moments where you really don't kind of feel like you're having fun anymore. Like what advice do you have to that? Like what can you really do at that moment when you're really starting to feel kind of down, like why am I doing this? Maybe I should quit kind of mentality.
So we talked about this post, right? Like there were
Yeah.
some ways to really focus on going back and realizing, okay, and actually there's more than those three that I mentioned. We could talk
Okay.
about a little bit,
Okay.
but I think again, going back and finding out like what made you fall in love with jiu-jitsu. For me, I remember when I first started, it was the idea that I still remember the very first uh, few months that I joined, it was me learning how to really control and pass someone. And then
Okay.
I spent the few years, if not decade, the first decade, just being a guard player. That was and so when I would go through these ruts, I would go back to what made me fall in love with it. And it was like guard passing. And so now, full circle, I feel pretty good on both. I spent over a decade developing my guard. And now I spent the last few years really perfecting my passing because this is what I fell in love with. It wasn't my guard, it was being on top, putting
Okay.
pressure. And so now for me, whenever I feel like I'm gonna run, he's like, you know what? I'm just gonna work passing. I'll work my guard to sweep, but as soon as I sweep, I'm gonna work passing and do what I'm good at. And it's like, okay, knee cut. I'm gonna go back to knee cut. Go
Okay.
back to the base, underhook, knee cut, and I do that, and then it reminds me, I'm like, oh, this is why I fell in love with jiu-jitsu again. It's like, oh, okay, going back to what it means to me. And I think as students, we forget about that. We start focusing on all this modern jiu-jitsu and we're trying new things, which has its place, right? So it's a balance. It's very important to evolve. But at the same time, we got to go back to what made us fall in love with jiu-jitsu. Like, remember that moment when we were just like, man, this is awesome. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm sweating. I just rolled 5, 6 rounds, feel great. Or sometimes, and I don't know if you've gone through this, but if you haven't, you will, and you probably have. It's when you go through this like perfectly balanced flow state
Okay.
when you're feeling you're not too nervous, right? Because like if you're on one side of the spectrum, you're too nervous and anxious, and you don't take the risk. And then if you're on the other side of the spectrum, you're just holding on, not opening up, right? Like so, there's like one becomes fearful and anxious prone, the other one becomes just kind of stubborn and like you're too relaxed. Well,
Hmm.
there's a balance in between, right? And they've written books on it and they call it the flow state. And when athletes enter the flow state, they're at their best, right? And Michael Jordan has talked about it, Tiger Woods. They're at their complete they're at their complete harmony in their head, in their physique, in their breathing. Everything clicks, and at that moment they show up. They don't overthink, but they're also just not just reacting. It's like this perfect balance between the subconscious fully taking over and allowing you to just do what your body and brain are meant to do, right? And that's to fight, defend, react. And so when you can master the subconscious to take over, right, then that's the perfect flow state. And so I think when people get in a rut is because they're overthinking. They start overanalyzing. They start like looking at it too much, and it's like, hey, just relax, have fun, go back to what you're good at. I always say go back to what you're good at because that's what made you fall in love with it, and it's most likely the reason why you were very used to winning. And if you disrupt that flow state by overthinking, by under preparing, little things like this, or even over relaxing, like, oh, you're so confident, you're just too relaxed. That's
Yeah.
when you get caught.
Yeah.
You get out of that flow state, right? And the reason we consciously drill and we consciously study is because that's how you feed the subconscious, right? You start feeding the subconscious all this stuff. And so you teach your body to move because ultimately, let's just be honest for a second, jiu-jitsu is hard. It's extremely difficult. It's very hard. Like if you think about it as a sport and art, it's pretty young. They have years of research on strength and conditioning, on basketball, on football, on soccer, right? On jiu-jitsu, MMA, grappling arts. They have very little data because it's hard to gauge someone's heartbeat when they're wrestling. I mean, you could put a heart strap on a basketball player all day, but you put it on a grappling ball, right? So we don't know, like at least at the very concrete level, what that looks like, but we have an idea. So having said that, it's hard to understand what your body's going through. It's going through all different types of hormonal reactions, by the way. Like, people don't realize that when you overtrain, and overtraining, by the way, is very important, but if you do overtrain, you actually can kill some of your hormone production. And like, yeah, so like if you were to get an athlete who's not juicing, by the way, let's talk about that first. So if an athlete's they're overtraining, their testosterone will dip the next few days because they've overtrained. So that's one example, right? Because it's hormonal response. You're in fight and flight constantly. So to be able to bring your subconscious into the fight or flight and to make it react daily, that's tough. That's super tough. And here's a great example. I don't know if you've ever done this, where you take a few days off and then you go back and you roll and you kind of feel horrible. Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, happened recently. I took 4 days off and I felt like I forgot everything. Yeah.
Right. It's just your nervous system, right? It hasn't been tapped. It's been asleep. So your parasympathetic and your sympathetic, they work in correlation with each other. So when you take complete day off, so this is why they encourage, if you listen to some, pretty good strength coaches, they'll say, hey, don't stop doing something every day. Like, even if you don't train jiu-jitsu, go for a brisk walk, run a mile, do some push-ups, just so your nervous system is always ready, because if you don't, you kind of crash. And then nothing can mimic rolling, but I think ultimately that's kind of what happens. So here's a perfect example. Like we said, you take 4 days off, you go back, it's a Monday, and you get, smashed at the gym, and you're like, is this even for me? I'm not feeling well. Well, like, how many days did you take off? What did you eat? Right? And here's a better question they asked. What did you watch? How did you sleep? What did you engage with in terms of, was there a lot of negativity around? What's the stress factor looking like with your family, with your wife, with your son, with your dog? Like, there's so many questions. People don't realize that they're taking all of that to the school. And so that's why, ironically, people love to train, because they get to get rid of that for a little bit. They just get to de-stress and kind of declutter the brain a little bit.
Yeah.
And so as that is very helpful, I think sometimes it can also make people even more stressed out, because then they look at their progression and they say, well, I don't feel like I'm getting better. Well, I'm sluggish today. Oh, it's not going my way. And like I said from the beginning, it's very hard to improve with a victim mindset in jiu-jitsu and in life, right? Yeah. So jiu-jitsu is like a way to kind of look at that. So I think we'll go back to the basics, like doing stuff that you're good at, really focusing on what you're good at and going back to that and just having fun. Looking at your body type again, and really, hey, if I'm a passer, I'm going to go back to my guard passing. And then, of course, sometimes, like, I make the students start in positions that they don't want to start in. I know that. But sometimes we do free rolling. And at the time we do free rolling, that's when you can do that as well. Sometimes make it fun by, like, setting a little game. If your partner is willing, you guys can say, like, hey, man, first to score, and then we start over. When you do that, it's actually more tiring, but it's also more fun, because now you're just trying to score all the time. And if your partner's weird about that or whatever, no problem. He just wants to roll. You can keep a score in your head. So you give yourself a little bit more of, like, a goal, right? So I'm trying to sweep, I'm trying to back. I look at kids too. In my kids' class, whenever they're getting bored, I try to tell them the point system, because then it's a game to them. If I tell the kid it's a drill, they kind of roll their eyes and they don't want to do it. But if I tell them it's a game, they're like, it's a game? Well, every kid wants to win at a game. Heck, every adult wants to win.
Yeah, definitely.
So first one to take someone down scores a point, or actually scores 2 points. So that way they already have an idea, oh, this is what it's like. I can't score. And then they lose, and I'm like, I lost. I'm like, well, you got to get better. You got to show up more, It's just start giving them that of, like, oh, it's okay, that you lost. But at the same time, you have to, like, hey, understand why you lost and then analyze it. So if children are happier, right, and they're making it more fun when they're using points, why not make that fun for us? Yeah. And so I'll see an adult on the side of the wall, and sometimes I'll give them a hard time, but usually they know I'm joking. Usually I'm joking. Sometimes we have the competition. I'm like, no, you can't be wrestling a lot. You need to be training, right? There's a for everything. But if it's like they're not competing, they're there to have fun, I remind them what to do. And I think little by little, they're able to regain that fulfillment that they had in the beginning when they started.
Okay. Yeah, no, I really like that, kind of going back to the whole game instead of, especially with kids, instead of like win or lose, it's, hey, maybe I got tapped out a couple times, but I was trying to take the back more and maybe I did it 3 times. That's 15 points in my book. It's kind of your own little self-progression meter kind of thing. That's super cool. Actually, I'm going to probably utilize that here pretty soon because there's a lot of things I'm working on. It is 2:30. I mean, I don't know how much time you have left because I know you have to go pick up the kid.
Yeah. How many more questions do we have?
Couple more, if that's cool. I don't know. That work?
We should. We
Okay,
should.
cool. So that was kind of my intention was to ask that maybe about a white belt, and it's kind of weird to say, but probably kids class white belt. It's not. There's probably some transfer over there. We both kind of go through those moments. So what does this look like, and what advice do you have for maybe say an upper belt doing the same thing? Maybe they took off a year and they're coming back and they're really not doing that well, or maybe they really thought they would have, maybe it's been 6 months and they really thought they were going to do better than they did and they just haven't.
Same. So let's say they come in and they go to my gym. I'd say, hey, you can start with me. You can start with the fundamentals group, whatever you feel more comfortable. And let's say we come to mutual agreement and they feel like they'll do one day with the fundamentals and then they do one day with the intermediate advanced group. Perfectly fine. They come back and they say, hey, like I'm embarrassed, like I'm gassing. Is it okay if I take a break? I'm like, absolutely. Take a break or drill on the side, do whatever is going to help you feel comfortable coming back. The last thing I want to do is scare them off. And so the advice would be the same. And then this is kind of like, I think the bigger picture that a lot of people, even people at the highest level are missing. And I'm talking about the highest level in everything, not just jiu-jitsu, is they focus so much on winning, right? Like what it win, that ironically they lose out on the process and they don't have fun because they're so focused with winning, whereas they should be focused with performance. Like all the top people at the highest level who win everything at every sport, if you study them, their focus is performance. Of course they want to win, but they're not out there putting pressure on themselves to win. They're putting more pressure to have a performance. And when they're allowed to perform at their best, they're most likely going to win. And that ironically is a winning mindset. So when you teach, it's really hard to teach someone this, right? Because it really does take like a self-therapeutic process. Like you have to write down notes. You have to literally put like stickies all over your living arrangement to remind you of who you are. And your performance is going to be dependent on your goals. Your goals are different than my goals, right? Someone might say, hey, I want to medal at this tournament. That to me is the ultimate goal. If I can medal at that tournament, I will feel very fulfilled. Someone might, oh, my goal is to win gold. Both of them are right. But if they focus on their performance and they're realistic with their goals, right, then they're going to see that it's easier to reach those goals because they're very realistic and they're very attainable. It would be like if a new white belt came in and says, hey, I want to win the world's, at brown belt next year. Like, well, no, like that's not realistic. You're probably not gonna get your brown belt. You're probably like, you be honest with them. But if a white belt says, I want to come in and win this tournament, I say, okay, let's start with this tournament first. Right. And then student, hey, just perform, go over the strategy we did in our class, because we go over like strategies for competition prep, go over the techniques, go over the mental management, like how are you going to control your feelings, get there 2 hours before your match, get a good warm up, have some snacks, like all the prep, over prepare. So when you go to competition, you're stressing about like 10 different things. Well, like cardio won't be one of them because you've over prepared, right? You've over conditioned yourself. So that already is out of there. So now you just worry about, making weight or whatever, right? Like you minimize that. And so color belt comes in, I tell them, focus on your performance. Don't focus on just winning all the time. And what does that look like? Well, if you've taken 2 years off, a great day for someone coming in is just being able to finish the rounds. To me, that's a win.
Yeah.
And so that's right.
Okay.
And then it's like not getting submitted as much by the younger colored belts. Okay, that's another check mark. And then the next month it's like, oh, I finally caught someone again. Another check mark. And so they build off their performance. And so it's much healthier for me to tell a child, hey, just go out there, perform. I'm proud of you if you perform your hardest. Then they're like, damn, dad, coach, whoever still loves me if I just go out there and give 100%. That's easy, right?
Yeah.
But if I tell you, hey, go out there, if you win, I'll love you no matter if you win or if you lose. I'm sorry, if you say if you win, I'll love you, then there's this pressure to win, right? It's much easier to go full throttle on a gas pedal than to focus on winning a race. Like if you go full throttle on a pedal, you're gonna see the outcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
They say do one thing for I think they say do one thing for the next few years and see what happens, right? Like you could even microsize that. Go hard, extremely hard for like 5 minutes and see what happens. So that's kind of, I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that's how I would like micro.
No, that makes a lot of sense, instead of kind of going all or nothing, just like, okay, I'm going to win, rather than just saying, you know what, see the steps maybe to winning rather than just the outcome, right? So it's, instead of just saying, I'm going to get gold, okay, well, this is what I got to do to work on that, and then start seeing that progression as you go, and then you can build up to that point, instead of making those realistic goals. And I guess just because limited time, I'm going to ask you one more question. Cool. So we talked about, you and I have had this conversation before about the importance of having fun, and that's what this entire topic is about. But so how valuable has this mentality been through your career of learning and competing and teaching?
Like the value of it being fun, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. Just keeping that
Yeah.
in mind and always kind of going back to it,
I think, I mean, it might sound cliche, but it's kind of like the catalyst of the whole thing, right? So people don't understand, like I show up, like I could easily hire someone to run the academy and I don't have to teach anymore, but why would I do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I love coaching. I love drilling. I love learning new techniques. I'm studying the greatest right now. Like, all these guys are winning world medals. I'm like immediately looking at their videos. I'll have some of my students who are jiu-jitsu nerds send me videos. They're like, hey, coach, like, heck yeah, I saw it. I noticed that. Like, and then they'll notice something I didn't. Like, oh, I didn't notice he did that with his left foot. Is one of my students start discussing content on like, on the greatest of the great, no-gi, gi, MMA, whatever it is. So to me, it's fun. Like this is like I truly, as cliche as it sounds, I'm living my dream, right? Like I, as they say, lucked out. But I don't think I lucked out. I think I just followed what I've always enjoyed, combat sports. And so to me, when I go to jiu-jitsu, it's part of my mental health. It's part of my training. It's part of my lifestyle, right? Like a lot of people say, like they go to this, like, oh, I got to diet. Like I don't diet. Like I just eat well because it's just part of the gig. Like I have to. And then, okay, eat something I shouldn't eat, right? Like a piece of cake. It feels good for like 5 minutes. And then I immediately regret it. I'm like, oh, why did I do this? And if it's the weekend, like it's not too bad. But for the most part, it's part of the lifestyle, like how you eat, how you dress, how you train, even how you sleep. Like sleep is so important, and it's honestly something that I've struggled with the last few years. And I think it all started in college when I would stay up late, write papers and stuff. It became this almost obstacle I had to really focus on. And finally I went to a doctor. I went to several doctors actually. Took a lot of prescription medication, which I don't recommend. And so finally I went to one of the last doctors, actually the blue belt. He's a student of mine. He says, hey man, it's just sleep hygiene. Just shut off the lights, like shut everything off and just darken the room and close your eyes and see what happens. Right. So I've been doing that more and it's not perfect, but I'm getting more sleep. I'm getting better sleep now. So that has helped a lot too. So from the little things to the big things, the lifestyle for me is just more enjoyable. It's more fulfilling. And I'm able to share that with people. I'm able to coach. Every time I go to the gym, I make it fun, whether I'm coaching, training, or both. I'm making it competitive, or I'm trying a new technique that I learned on some of my students, or maybe some of my students are bringing it. So I'm trying my best to try to get them back and stuff. So having that competitive spirit and being able to do that is a balance act, but it helps you really enjoy the process without having to stress about the other things outside of jiu-jitsu, which are stressful, right? Like family, like my kids, like all this other stuff that I have to deal with, but I'm enriching my life with it. And then I'm enriching others. I'm also enriching my family. Like my kids have no choice. They have to train. And it's like, hey, you're training, you're doing your homework, you're eating your snack. He's like, oh, but I always lose. And I'm like, it's okay. That's all right. I told my son the other day, he's like, I always lose in jiu-jitsu. I'm like, that's okay. That's part of the learning. At least you're training, you're getting better. And right now he doesn't understand, but 10, 20 years from now, he'll understand.
Yeah.
You know, when
Mhm.
the student, when the kid goes to the dentist, they hate it. But 20 years from now, they're going to be grateful to their parents that they went to the dentist once or twice a year, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh man, I'm taken care of because the dentist is always making sure and reminding us what we need to do. There's no difference other than here you got to be putting in the work every week. So that's kind of how I do it, at least for myself. And then I compete for fun. There's nothing to prove anymore at this point, but I just compete for fun because I just have fun doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you spend so much time owning a skill, you definitely want to put it to the test, right?
Yeah.
But as far as like, you talk about just eating right and everything, and because I found on this, my experience with jujitsu is I don't want to eat bad. I don't want to drink as much. I don't want to do anything I shouldn't do because I want to be as healthy as possible. Because the healthier I am, the better I'm going to be, and the more progress I'm going to see, and the less likely that I'm just going to get tapped out from exhaustion or etc. Just from being out of shape or eating poorly or not getting enough sleep. I tell that to people all the time, people that want to quit smoking or whatever. This isn't a guaranteed method, but I'm like, it might help. You're going to want to be healthier doing this. But anyway, uh, we're kind of running out of time, but it was so nice to talk to you, Tony, and it was nice to meet you face to face finally. And I truly appreciate you doing this. And yeah, man, I'll talk to you soon. Cool. Keep in touch.
Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's do it again. I
All
really
right.
enjoyed this.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll find another topic for next month. All right, man. Yeah, take it easy.